I didn't know my life was about to split cleanly in two that night. One moment, I was standing in the corner of a glittering ballroom, invisible by design, swirling a glass of whiskey I didn't need. The next, I was watching my husband smile as another man crossed a line that should never have been crossed, right in front of half of Seattle's tech elite. This happened at my husband's company Christmas gala last year, and I'm still unpacking the weight of it. What looks like a public humiliation was actually the spark that burned an empire to the ground. For the sake of this story, I'll call myself Jane. My husband Daniel works at TechFlow Industries, one of those massive tech companies downtown that practically owns the skyline. Glass towers, private elevators, people who talk about changing the world while stepping on anyone in their way. For 3 years, I played my role perfectly, the unemployed wife, the quiet +1, the woman who stayed home, managed our modest investments, and smiled politely at corporate events while everyone assumed Daniel was carrying the financial weight of our marriage. I let them believe that. The irony still makes me smile. That night, the annual Christmas gala was held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. Crystal chandeliers, marble floors, money dripping from every surface. Executives laughed too loudly. Their spouses scanned the room like predators sizing up social rank. I stayed where I always stayed, near the edge, watching, unnoticed, until Marcus Stone arrived, TechFlow's CEO. 6'something", wrapped in arrogance and a custom tux, with the kind of smile men develop when no one has told them no in decades. When he entered the room, the energy shifted. People straightened, voices softened. Power recognizes power, even when it's borrowed. Daniel was in his element that night, confident, polished, laughing with VPs, charming board members. I watched him from a distance, proud and detached in equal measure. Then Marcus locked onto me. He didn't hesitate, didn't glance at Daniel. He stepped into my space and kissed my cheek, slow, deliberate, possessive, like I was part of the company he owned. I froze. Daniel didn't pull him back, didn't step in. He just laughed, nervously, politely, like this was normal, like I was overreacting before I'd even reacted. Marcus finally turned to face me fully, eyes glittering with cruel amusement, and said loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Ah, the unemployed wife." The room went quiet, then exploded with laughter, including my husband's. That was the moment something inside me went completely still. And that was the moment Marcus Stone made the most expensive mistake of his life. Before that night, before the laughter and the silence that followed it, my life looked ordinary, intentionally ordinary. I was 36 years old, married for 4, and, according to everyone who thought they knew me, comfortably unemployed. Daniel and I met years ago, long before TechFlow, before his polished confidence and tailored suits. We met the unglamorous way, through a mutual friend at a small networking event that smelled like burnt coffee and ambition. He was sharp, driven, endlessly talkative about branding strategies and market positioning. I was quieter, observant. I asked questions instead of talking about myself. That alone should have told me something. Back then, I was fresh off selling my first startup, something I never advertised, never framed as a flex. I learned early that money changes how people listen to you. I wanted to be heard without it. So when Daniel talked about wanting a normal life, I believed him. When he said he didn't care who made more, I let myself trust that. We dated for 2 years before getting married. 2 years of shared takeout dinners, late night talks about dreams, and careful optimism. I told him I wanted simplicity, stability, privacy. He said that sounded perfect. When we married, I stepped back, on purpose. I let him shine at TechFlow while I managed investments from home. That phrase became a convenient box everyone put me in. No one asked what those investments were. No one cared enough to look closer. Daniel didn't either. At first, it was subtle. A joke here, a comment there. "You don't get corporate politics," he'd say, smiling like he was explaining something to a child. Or, "Must be nice not having real pressure." I brushed it off, told myself it was stress, ambition, the cost of climbing. His family didn't help. His mother asked every holiday when I planned to do something again. His brother joked about me being retired early. Daniel never corrected them. He just laughed, same polite laugh he used at the gala. Over time, I became smaller in public, quieter at events, less visible by design. Not because I lacked confidence, but because invisibility gave me clarity. I watched how people behaved when they thought I didn't matter. At TechFlow parties, Daniel transformed. He spoke louder, stood straighter, let executives interrupt me mid-sentence without flinching. I told myself love meant compromise, that marriages had seasons, that he'd find his way back. I ignored warning signs because none of them were dramatic. No shouting, no obvious betrayal, just erosion. Marcus Stone had always been part of that erosion. Daniel talked about him constantly, equal parts admiration and fear. Marcus was demanding, brilliant, ruthless, a man whose approval felt like oxygen inside those glass towers. I noticed how Daniel leaned in when Marcus spoke, how he laughed a beat too fast at his jokes, how he never defended me when Marcus dismissed me with a glance. Still, I stayed quiet. Not because I was weak, but because I was patient. Because while Daniel climbed titles, I was building something far larger, something deliberately invisible. I structured my days around quiet calls, legal briefings, numbers that didn't need applause. I didn't want power that announced itself. I wanted power that waited. By the time that Christmas gala arrived, 3 years had passed. 3 years of being underestimated. 3 years of people mistaking silence for absence. Daniel thought I needed him. Marcus thought I didn't matter. And I let them both believe it. Because when people underestimate you long enough, they stop watching. And that's when everything becomes possible. Looking back now, the warning signs weren't hidden. They were everywhere. I just didn't recognize them as warnings at the time. Only inconveniences I kept smoothing over in the name of marriage. Daniel started changing in ways that were easy to excuse, but impossible to ignore once they piled up. He stopped asking about my day. Not abruptly, just gradually, like someone turning down a dimmer switch. Conversations became transactional, short, efficient. If I talked about something that didn't relate to TechFlow, his attention drifted. His phone always seemed more urgent than whatever I was saying. At corporate events, his hands stopped reaching for mine. It wasn't dramatic, no sudden rejection, just a step ahead of me instead of beside me. A half turn away instead of toward. Small physical distances that created emotional ones. Marcus Stone's influence grew stronger the higher Daniel climbed. There were late meetings, emergency calls, weekends that disappeared into strategy sessions. Marcus's name came up more often than mine. When Daniel spoke about him, it wasn't admiration anymore, it was reverence. Like Marcus was a force of nature rather than a deeply flawed man with too much power. I noticed how Daniel laughed differently around him. Higher, faster, like laughter offered as a shield. The first time I felt truly uncomfortable was months before the gala. We were at a TechFlow networking dinner, smaller, more intimate. Marcus sat across from me. He interrupted me mid-sentence to ask Daniel a question. Didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the interruption. Daniel didn't notice. Later, in the car, I mentioned it. He doesn't mean anything by it, Daniel said quickly, too quickly. That's just how he is. That phrase, that's just how he is, became a pattern. Marcus's comments grew sharper. He'd joke about kept spouses, about people who marry up and coast. His eyes always flicked to me when he said it. Daniel never challenged him. Friends began echoing the same tone. People I barely knew asked when I planned to jump back in. Others assumed Daniel paid for everything. I let the assumptions sit, watched how easily narratives formed when no one contradicted them. Even Daniel started believing them. One night, after an argument about something trivial, dishes, I think, He muttered, "I carry a lot on my shoulders, you know." I stared at him, waited for him to clarify. He didn't. That was when I realized something had shifted fundamentally. He no longer saw us as partners. He saw himself as the provider and me as an accessory. The irony almost hurt to laugh at. By then, I'd already spent years quietly acquiring tech flow, one careful move at a time. Legal structures layered like armor, holdings dispersed across jurisdictions, every step deliberate, every purchase calculated to stay invisible. Daniel never asked what I actually did all day. Marcus never imagined someone like me could be dangerous. And that's how the atmosphere turned heavy without anyone noticing the pressure building. That's how disrespect grows bold when left unchecked. That's how men like Marcus become careless, and men like Daniel become complicit. By the time the Christmas gala arrived, the tension was already there, humming beneath the surface. All it needed was a spark. The moment itself was deceptively small. No screaming, no shattered glass, no dramatic confrontation that would have justified an immediate exit. Just a kiss, a single deliberate kiss on my cheek, slow enough to be intentional, public enough to be humiliating. Marcus leaned in as if he owned the space between us, as if the room, the company, and the people inside it, including my husband, were extensions of his authority. His cologne hit me first, sharp, expensive, invasive. I remember my shoulders stiffening before my mind fully caught up. And then, the worst part. Daniel didn't react. He didn't step forward, didn't place a hand on my back, didn't say my name. He stood there smiling, nodding faintly, like he'd just watched a perfectly acceptable exchange between equals. Marcus finally turned toward him, then back to me, his lips curling with satisfaction. "Relax," he said lightly. "Just showing appreciation." Then he looked at me again, eyes gleaming, and raised his voice just enough. "Ah," he said, "the unemployed wife." Time slowed in a way that felt almost cinematic. I heard the clink of glasses, the soft gasp from someone nearby, the pause, just long enough for people to sense that something had gone wrong. Then Marcus continued. "Must be nice," he added, louder now, "living off someone else's hard work. No pressure, no responsibility, just existing." The laughter hit like a wave. It wasn't polite laughter. It wasn't nervous laughter. It was real, deep, satisfied amusement from people relieved it wasn't them standing there. I watched faces fold into smiles. Executives leaned toward each other. Someone actually wiped a tear from their eye, like Marcus had delivered the joke of the decade. And then I heard Daniel laugh. Not loudly, not cruelly, but enough. Enough that there was no confusion. Enough that I knew, without a doubt, that he wasn't shocked. He wasn't uncomfortable. He wasn't defending me in silence. He agreed. My chest tightened, not in panic, in clarity. I felt my heart beat slow instead of race. My hands didn't shake. My mind didn't spiral. It clicked. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was who he had become. Marcus kept going, emboldened by the crowd. "Honestly," he said, spreading his hands theatrically, "I don't know how you do it, Daniel. Carrying dead weight like that. Guess every company needs its charity cases." More laughter. I looked at my husband. He wouldn't meet my eyes. That told me everything. Something cold and precise settled over me then. Not anger, not grief, calculation. The kind that comes when the emotional fog clears and you finally see the terrain for what it is. I could have walked away. I could have cried in the bathroom, gone home, confronted Daniel behind closed doors like a wounded spouse trying to salvage dignity. That's what they expected. Instead, I took a sip of my whiskey and stepped forward. The room didn't notice at first. They were still riding the wave of Marcus's performance. But as I moved, slowly, deliberately, the laughter thinned. Conversation stuttered. Marcus turned, grin widening, clearly expecting a reaction, an apology, maybe a tearful protest. I stopped close enough that only he could hear me, close enough that my voice didn't need volume. "You might want to check your stock price," I said calmly. The shift in his expression was exquisite. Confidence flickered. Confusion followed. Then something darker, recognition maybe, or fear trying to form before he could suppress it. I didn't wait to see which one. I turned and walked toward the exit. Behind me, the ballroom fell into a stunned hush. I heard someone whisper my name, heard Marcus bark something sharp, probably calling for security. It didn't matter. By the time I stepped into the cold Seattle night, my decision was already made. Friday night had given me exactly what I needed: an audience, an excuse, and a reason no one could argue with. The cold air outside the hotel hit my skin like a reset button. I stood there for a moment, heels planted on the pavement, breathing slowly, deep, controlled breaths that steadied my hands and cleared the last traces of adrenaline from my bloodstream. I didn't feel shaky. I didn't feel angry in the way people expect after humiliation. I felt awake. Inside the car, the silence was absolute. No music, no calls, just the soft hum of the engine and the city lights sliding past the windshield like they belonged to another life. I replayed the scene in my head, not to torture myself, but to catalog it. Every word Marcus had used, every laugh, every second of Daniel's silence. I needed to remember it clearly because this wasn't about revenge. This was about precision. When I got home, the house was dark. Daniel hadn't come back yet. I poured myself a glass of water instead of something stronger. I wanted my thoughts sharp. I didn't cry. That surprised me more than anything else. I sat at the desk in what Daniel called the spare room, the room he thought was a hobby space or a place where I passed time. To me, it was a command center. Dual monitors, secure lines, files layered with encryption he'd never once asked about. I picked up my phone and dialed one number. Elena Rodriguez answered on the second ring. She always did. "Elena," I said, "we're done waiting." There was a pause. Not confusion, but anticipation. "I'm guessing this isn't about a dinner party," she replied calmly. "He crossed a line," I said, publicly, in front of employees, board members, and press. Another pause, calculating this time. "And your husband?" she asked carefully. He laughed. That was all it took. "Understood," Elena said. "How visible was it?" "Highly," I replied. "Which means the response can be visible too." "That does change things," she said softly. "You know, once we move, there's no undoing it." "I know." I stared at the dark reflection of myself in the monitor. Calm, focused, not broken. "I'm ready." Daniel came home close to midnight. I heard his keys before I saw him. He hesitated in the doorway, like he expected a confrontation. I stayed seated, scrolling through documents like nothing had happened. He cleared his throat. "You left early," he said. "Yes." An entire evening of humiliation, and that was his opening line. He tried to explain how Marcus was drunk, how it was just a joke, how I shouldn't take things so personally in corporate spaces. Each sentence landed flatter than the last. I let him talk. When he finally stopped, I looked up. "Do you agree with what he said?" I asked. Daniel opened his mouth, closed it, looked away. That was answer enough. "I need some space," he muttered. That night, we slept in separate rooms. And for the first time since we'd married, I realized something with brutal clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding to be fixed. And while Daniel was worried about office gossip and optics, I was already moving pieces into position. Monday morning was coming, and Marcus Stone had no idea how little time he had left. Monday morning arrived sharp and unforgiving, wrapped in that crisp Seattle cold that makes everything feel deliberate. I woke before dawn, not from anxiety, but from habit. This wasn't an emotional morning, it was an operational one. Coffee brewed quietly while I reviewed overnight market movements, confirming what I already knew. TechFlow stock had opened exactly where it needed to. Calm, unaware, vulnerable. At 7:45 a.m., I walked into TechFlow's executive parking garage like I belonged there, because I did. Elena was already waiting in the lobby with her team. Auditors, legal counsel, quiet professionals carrying briefcases heavy enough to collapse careers. No one spoke loudly. No one needed to. This wasn't a spectacle yet. It was a procedure. We moved through the executive floor without resistance. Authority has a certain gravity when it's real. Marcus's assistant looked up, startled. She tried to block us out of reflex. He isn't expecting. I know, Elena said smoothly. We are. The elevator chimed behind us. Marcus stepped out, immaculate as ever. Perfect suit, perfect hair, perfect confidence. It cracked the moment he saw us. What is this? He snapped. Elena didn't flinch. I represent the majority shareholder of TechFlow Industries. He laughed, loudly, incorrectly. I am the majority shareholder. No, she replied. You were. That was when I stepped forward. The recognition hit him like a delayed explosion. You, he whispered. That's impossible. Is it? I asked calmly. Elena slid the documents onto his desk. Percentages, structures, ownership maps. 94.7%. Clean, legal, irrevocable. Marcus's bravado collapsed into something desperate. He tried to threaten, then bargain, then blame. Meanwhile, word spread. Employees whispered. Board members checked their phones. By noon, the rumor mill was spinning out of control. By mid-afternoon, confirmation followed. Marcus Stone was out. But the escalation didn't stop there. Daniel found out the same way everyone else did, through the internal announcement. He came home, furious. You fired my CEO, he said, voice shaking. Do you understand what this does to me? I do, I replied. What it does to us? I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw a man more afraid of losing status than losing his wife. I didn't fire your CEO, I said. I removed an executive who violated company policy, publicly. Silence followed, then denial, accusations, questions I'd already answered. That night, Daniel's family called. His mother accused me of humiliating her son. His brother implied I'd gotten lucky. Friends hinted I'd overreacted. Not one of them asked what Marcus had done. That told me everything. At TechFlow, the shift was immediate. Fear dissolved. Conversations changed. People stood taller. The culture Marcus cultivated, intimidation masked as leadership, evaporated once the source was gone. I promoted Lisa Chen, the head of engineering Marcus had kept buried. Brilliant, quiet, unimpressed by ego. Results followed fast. And Daniel? He watched it all unfold like someone realizing too late that the ground beneath them had never been theirs. The power dynamics he'd relied on were gone, and for the first time, he didn't know where he stood. Power doesn't protect you from grief. That's the lie people tell themselves, that once you regain control, the pain evaporates. It doesn't. It just gets quieter, heavier, more intimate. The weeks after Marcus's removal were some of the loneliest of my life. TechFlow was stabilizing. The numbers were strong. The board was cooperative. Lisa was thriving in her new role. On paper, everything was working exactly as it should. At home, nothing was. Daniel and I moved around each other like polite strangers. We spoke in short sentences, logistics, schedules, work updates that felt safer than feelings. We stopped touching entirely, not out of anger, but exhaustion. One night, I stood in the kitchen long after he'd gone to bed, staring at a sink full of dishes I didn't remember using. The house felt hollow, too quiet, like a place that remembered laughter but no longer produced it. That was when it hit me. Not the betrayal, not the public humiliation, not even the marriage cracking under pressure. It was the realization that I had been alone in that ballroom long before Marcus ever touched me. I replayed the laughter again, not his, but Daniel's. The sound of it echoed louder in my head than anything Marcus had said, because Marcus was a stranger with power. Daniel was the man who promised to stand beside me. I asked myself questions I'd been avoiding for years. When did he stop seeing me as his equal? When did love turn into convenience? And how long had I been shrinking myself to make him comfortable? For the first time, doubt crept in. Not about my decisions, but about my identity within this marriage. Had I hidden too well? Had my silence trained him to underestimate me? Or had it simply allowed him to forget who I was? There were nights I slept fully dressed on top of the covers, staring at the ceiling, listening to the rhythm of his breathing through the wall. Nights where I wondered if power had saved my pride but destroyed my marriage. I didn't regret removing Marcus, but I mourned what his cruelty exposed. I mourned the version of us I thought still existed. That was the lowest point. Not rage, not despair, but a quiet grief that asked a dangerous question. What if this can't be repaired? And for the first time since the gala, I didn't know the answer. The turning point didn't arrive with a fight. It came quietly, the way real truths often do, without drama, without raised voices, without anyone trying to win. It started with a phone call. Lisa Chen called late one evening, her voice hesitant in a way I'd never heard before. "Can I ask you something personal?" she said. "Of course," I replied. She paused. "Why did you stay invisible for so long?" The question landed heavier than she intended. I gave the practiced answer at first. Privacy, choice, balance. She listened, then gently pushed back. "I've worked under men like Marcus my entire career," she said. "They don't overlook people by accident. They exploit what others are willing to hide." After we hung up, I sat with that, not as a judgment, but as a mirror.